Again, if you're just joining us, what you're looking at is the Galveston County Courthouse. We have a verdict in the civil trial involving the Santa Fe High School shooting from 2018. The verdict is in. We're waiting to hear the announcement.
Right. So we had learned not too long ago that the jurors had asked the judge for permission to keep working until 6:30 or 7 tonight. That's after they spent most of the day reviewing key pieces of evidence. And this trial now going on for a couple of weeks here in Galveston County, this civil trial. And we heard testimony from both parents, from both Demetrius Pogorczy's mother and father. And as we zoom in, the gentleman to the back propping up his face on his hand, that is Demetrius Pogorczy's father as well. But we heard testimony from them. They were asked if they felt as though they were responsible. At one point, the father had said no, then had shown a little bit remorse when asked again in a different way on the stand as well. But of course, this has been a trial that has been followed very closely. We've had parents of victims take part in this trial, be very vocal about what they think should happen in this case.
Yeah, one of the things for the victims' families is they're waiting for some sort of justice. There's been no criminal trial because the suspect has been deemed incompetent to stand trial. And so this will be the closest thing. Let's listen in to the judge in Galveston County right now.
All right, the jury's verdict is as follows. With regard to question number 1, did Demetrius Pogorczyk commit an assault against the following persons? And the answers: 1, Christopher Jake Stone, yes. Christian Riley Garcia, yes. Sabika Aziz Sheikh, yes. Jared Connard Black, yes. Kimberly Vaughn, yes. Aaron Kyle McLeod, yes. Cynthia Tisdale, yes. Flo Rice, yes. Chase Yarbrough, yes. Trenton Beasley, yes. Clayton Horn, yes. Question number 2. Did the negligence, if any of those named below, proximately cause the occurrence in question? The answers are Antonios Pogorczyk, no. Rose Marie Cosmetatos, no. Lucky Gunner LLC, yes. If you have answered no to each part of that question, number 1, and no to each part of question number 2, that do not answer questions 3 through 24. If you have answered yes to any part of question 1, or if you have answered yes to any part of question 2, then answer question number 3. Answer to question number 3. What percentage of the conduct that caused the occurrence in question described in your answers to questions number 1 and 2 do you find to be attributable to each of the following? Antonio Pogorczyk, 0%. Rosemarie Cosmetatos, 0%. Demetrius Pogorczyk, 80%. Lucky Gunner LLC, 20%. If you have answered question yes to any part of question 1, or if you have answered yes to any part of question number 2, then answer questions 4 through 21. All right, and question number 4. What sum of money, if paid now in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Christopher Stone and Rosie Giannis for their damages, if any, resulting from the death of Christopher Jake Stone? Christopher Stone, $1 million. Rosie Giannis, $1 million. Loss of companionship, and society that in reasonable probability Christopher Stone and Rosie Yanis will sustain in the future. Christopher Stone, $1 million. Rosie Yanis, $1 million. Mental anguish sustained in the past. Christopher Stone, $1 million. Rosie Yanis, $1 million. Mental anguish that in reasonable probability Christopher Stone and Rosie Yanis will sustain in the future. Christopher Stone, $1 million. Rosie Yanis, $1 million. Question number 5. What sum of money would have fairly and reasonably compensated Christopher Jake Stone for the pain and mental anguish, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answers to questions number 1 and 2? Answer, $12 million. Question number 6. What sum of money, if now paid in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Shannon Clausen for her damage, if any, resulting from the death of Christian Riley Garcia? Answer A, loss of companionship and society sustained in the past, $2 million. Loss of companionship and society that in reasonable probability Shannon Clausen will sustain in the future, $2 million. Mental anguish sustained in the past, $2 million. Mental anguish that in reasonable probability Shannon Clausen will sustain in the future, $2 million. Question number 7. What sum of money would have fairly and reasonably compensated Christian Riley Garcia for pain and mental anguish, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answers to questions number 1 and 2? Answer, $12 million. Question number 8. What sum of money, if now paid in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Abdul Aziz and Farah Naz for their damages, if any, resulting from the death of Sabika Aziz Sheikh? Answer A, loss of companionship and society sustained in the past, Abdul Aziz, $1 million. Farah Naz, $1 million. Loss of companionship and society that in reasonable probability Abdul Aziz and Farah Naz will sustain in the future. Abdul Aziz, $1 million. Farah Naz, $1 million. Mental anguish sustained in the past. Abdul Aziz, $1 million. Farah Naz, $1 million. Mental anguish that in reasonable probability Abdul Aziz and Farah Naz will sustain in the future. Abdul Aziz, $1 million. Farah Naz, $1 million. Question number 9. What sum of money would have fairly and reasonably compensated Sabika Aziz Sheikh for pain and mental anguish, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answers to questions number 1 and 2? Answer, $12 million. Question number 10. What sum of money, if paid now in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Pamela Stanage for her damages, if any, resulting from the death of Jared Conard Black? Loss of companionship and society sustained in the past, $2 million. Loss of companionship and society that in reasonable probability Pamela Stanage will sustain in the future, $2 million. Mental anguish sustained in the past, $2 million. Mental anguish that in reasonable probability Pamela Stanage will sustain in the future. Answer, $2 million. Question number 11. What sum of money would have fairly and reasonably compensated Jared Conard Black for pain and mental anguish, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answers to questions number 1 and 2? Answer, $12 million. Question number 12. What sum of money would fairly and reasonably compensate Rhonda Hart for her damages, if any, resulting from the death of Kimberly Vaughn? Loss of companionship and society sustained in the past, $2 million. Loss of companionship and society that in reasonable probability Rhonda Hart will sustain in the future, $2 million. Mental anguish sustained in the past, $2 million. Mental anguish that in reasonable probability Rhonda Hart will sustain in the future, $2 million. Question 13. What sum of money would have fairly and reasonably compensated Kimberly Vaughn for pain and mental anguish, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answer to questions 1 and 2? Answer, $12 million. Question number 14. What sum of money, if now paid in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Mark McLeod and Gail McLeod for their damages, if any, resulting from the death of Aaron Kyle McLeod? Loss of companionship and society sustained in the past, $1 million. Mark McLeod, $1 million. Gail McLeod, $1 million. Loss of companionship and society that in reasonable probability Mark McLeod and Gail McLeod will sustain in the future. Mark McLeod, $1 million. Gail McLeod, $1 million. Mental anguish sustained in the past, Mark McLeod, $1 million. Gail McLeod, $1 million. Mental anguish that in reasonable probability that Mark McLeod and Gail McLeod will sustain in the future. Mark McLeod, $1 million. Gail McLeod, $1 million. Question 15. What sum of money would have fairly and reasonably compensated Aaron Kyle McLeod for pain and mental anguish, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answer to questions number 1 and 2? Answer, $12 million. Question number 16. What sum of money, if now paid in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Reese Tisdale for his damages, if any, resulting from the death of Cynthia Tisdale? Loss of companionship and society sustained in the past, $2 million. Loss of companionship and society that in reasonable probability Reese Tisdale will sustain in the future, $2 million. Mental anguish sustained in the past, $2 million. Mental anguish that in reasonable probability Reese Tisdale will sustain in the future, $2 million. Question number 17. What sum of money would have fairly and reasonably compensated Cynthia Tisdale for pain and mental anguish, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answer to questions number 1 and 2? Answer, $12 million. Question number 18. What sum of money, if now paid in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Flo Rice for her injuries, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in questions number 1 and 2? Physical pain and mental anguish sustained in the past, $6 million. Physical pain and mental anguish that in reasonable probability Flo Rice will incur in the future, $6 million. Physical pain sustained, a physical impairment sustained in the past, $2 million. Physical impairment that in reasonable probability Flo Rice will incur in the future, $2 million. Disfigurement in the past, $2 million. Disfigurement that in reasonable probability Flo Rice will sustain in the future, $2 million. Question number 19. What sum of money, if paid now in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Chase Yarbrough for his injuries, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answer to questions number 1 and 2. Physical pain and mental anguish sustained in the past, $6 million. Physical pain and mental anguish that in reasonable probability Chase Yarbrough will incur in the future, $6 million. Physical impairment sustained in the past, $2 million. Physical impairment that in reasonable probability Chase Yarbrough will incur in the future, $2 million. Disfigurement in the past, $2 million. Disfigurement that in reasonable probability Chase Yarbrough will sustain in the future, $2 million.
You are listening to a verdict in the civil trial involving the Santa Fe school shooting. The bottom line, the headline is here that the jury has decided the parents of the alleged gunmen are not liable in the shooting.
Not negligent. We have to send you now to CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention, but our coverage of the Santa Fe verdict continues on KHRU.com.
And mental anguish sustained in the past, $10 million. Physical pain and mental anguish that in reasonable probability Trenton Beasley will incur in the future, $10 million. Physical impairment sustained in the past, 0. Physical impairment that in reasonable probability Trenton Beasley will incur in the future, 0. Disfigurement in the past, 0. Disfigurement that in reasonable probability Trenton Beasley will sustain in the future, 0. Question number 21. What sum of money, if paid now in cash, would fairly and reasonably compensate Clayton Horn for his injuries, if any, that resulted from the conduct found by you in answers to questions number 1 and 2? Physical pain and mental anguish sustained in the past, $6 million. Physical pain and mental anguish that in reasonable probability Clayton Horn will incur in the future, $6 million. Physical pain, impairment sustained in the past, $2 million. Physical impairment that in reasonable probability Clayton Horn will incur in the future, $2 million. Disfigurement in the past, $2 million. Disfigurement that in reasonable probability Clayton Horn will sustain in the future, $2 million. Question number 22. Do you find by clear and convincing evidence that the harm to the persons listed below resulted from malice? Answer yes or no. Christopher Jake Stone, yes. Christopher Riley Garcia, yes. Sabika Aziz Sheik, yes. Jared Conard Black, yes. Kimberly Vaughn, yes. Aaron Kyle McLeod, yes. Cynthia Tisdale, yes. Flo Rice, yes. Chase Yarbrough, yes. Trenton Beasley, yes. Clayton Horn, yes. For each person where you unanimously answered yes to question number 2, then answer question number 23. Question number 23. What sum of money, if any, if paid now in cash, should be assessed against Demetrius Pagortis and awarded to each of the persons listed below as exemplary damages, if any, for the conduct found in response to question number 22? Christopher Jake Stone, $10 million. Christian Riley Garcia, $10 million. Sabika Aziz Sheik, $10 million. Jared Conard Black, $10 million. Kimberly Vaughn, $10 million. Aaron Kyle McLeod, $10 million. Cynthia Tisdale, $10 million. Flo Rice, $10 million. Chase Yarbrough, $10 million. Trenton Beasley, $10 million. and Clayton Horn, $10 million. Question number 24. Do you find that Demetrius Pagortas committed the offense of aggravated assault under Texas Penal Code Section 22.02 against the persons listed below? Christopher J. Stone, yes. Christian Riley Garcia, yes. Sabika Aziz Sheikh, yes. Jared Connard Black, yes. Kimberly Vaughn, yes. Aaron Kyle McLeod, yes. Cynthia Tisdale, yes. Flo Rice, yes. Chase Yarbrough, yes. Trenton Beasley, yes. Clayton Horn, yes. All right. And presiding juror, I see there are 10 signatures affixed as the certificate to these answers to the jury questions. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And all the same 10 jurors agreed with each response and answer to these questions?
Yes, sir.
All right. At this time, do any of the plaintiffs desire to poll the jury?
No, Your Honor.
Is the defendant, Ms. Laird?
No, Your Honor.
Mr.
No, Your
Torres? All right. It's been a long 3 weeks for you, I understand that. And understand that the questions you were asked were not easy. But your service at this time has now come to an end. But I'm sure as you leave here today, you will carry with you the memories of what you have heard and what you have seen and witnessed in this courtroom over the last 3 weeks. The pain and the hurt resulting from this tragic event that occurred on May 18th of 2018 are without a doubt long-lasting and far-reaching. But hopefully you will also be able to leave here knowing that even in the face of tragedy and crisis, we can survive. Why? Because there is still goodness in the world. And I'm reminded of that by the words of a courageous young teenage girl by the name of Anna Frank, who wrote in her diary these words: "What is done cannot be undone, but one can prevent it happening again. I don't think of all the misery, but of the beauty that still remains. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." You know, when you leave here today, know that your voice will be heard and your message will be clear. We need to protect our children. They need to feel safe when they go to school. They need to feel safe at home. And that message will carry even outside of the walls and the doors of this courtroom. And hopefully it will fall into the ears of our legislators who can help in taking some action to help us so that this type of thing never happens again. Your message has been received. Your verdict is clear. And I thank you as you leave here today for your time, your patience, and your service. And to all the families and all the parties, I think what hurts most is to believe that any one of those that were lost on that day, or anyone that were injured, have been forgotten. This community is behind you. They will be there for you. You are not alone. And that goes for everybody who this tragedy has reached. May we someday all find peace. With that, your service as jurors has ended. I'm going to allow you one more time to go back to the jury room and to gather your personal belongings. And then we're going to release you so you may go home and have an opportunity this evening to say, I love you to those who care. This court stands adjourned.
All rise for the jury.
Well, the Santa Fe school shooting civil trial wrapping up. We've been following this breaking news, a verdict in that trial for about the past half hour. We heard the jury's answers to a long series of questions that had to be answered within that verdict. 24 questions to be exact, starting with the negligence questions. Both the mother and the father, the jury determined, were not negligent, answering no to those questions. And another answer, the overwhelming responsibility, deemed it 80% due to Demetrius Pogorczy's, the accused shooter. The gun manufacturer is 20% liable.
So again, the headline is the parents not liable in this civil trial. That was the biggest thought in terms of survivors' family members. We also heard about millions of dollars awarded for pain and mental anguish, the jury deciding to award millions while answering these questions, awarding the relatives of the victims. There were 10 victims, 13 survivors. Again, 24 total questions. There's a lot to break down here.
Quite a bit. KHOU 11 legal analyst Carmen Rowe is here now to help us understand. Let's start with that big headline, the parents not negligent. Walk us through that, Carmen.
Sure. I mean, this is a lot, 33 pages of the jury charge, but the second question asks simply whether or not there was liability in the way of negligence against either parent and or Lucky Gunner. And surprisingly, this jury was unable to find either negligence or that if there was negligence on the part of the parents, that it was the proximate cause of this shooting. And I've always believed that's really where they were going to have to make some really difficult decisions. And remember, the negligence in this case had to do with one of two issues. One, if the guns were made available to the shooter, and then two, whether or not there was a mental health issue that the parents should have been aware of and acted upon and let others know about. So those were the issues surrounding the negligence. But because the jury rejected negligence for both parents, we may never know whether they believed, based on the testimony, that they were negligent, or if that negligence just simply was not the proximate cause of the shooting in this case. And I think that the numbers, both as to the 80% responsibility for the shooter, as well as those really big numbers on punitive damages, suggest that they believe that the shooter was primarily responsible for the shooting.
So that raises a couple questions, Carmen. Who's on the hook for the money that we're talking about? Is it the family? Is it the gun manufacturer, the ammunitions company, or the online seller? Who's on the hook here?
You know, Len, the interesting answer to that question is the only people on the hook now are the shooter, who we know has been declared incompetent and who's in custody, and Lucky Gunner, the ammunition company that sold him the ammunition in this case. And it's my understanding that that company has already settled with the families. So, what are we going to see in the reality of money to these families based on the numbers we heard today? Probably nothing at all. And so, just like the plaintiffs argued in their closing statements, this was more about a message than money. And based on the numbers and the percentages we saw today, I think that's more true than I ever thought it could be.
So the parents here, in some ways, avoided being found guilty, but still, with all of these damages and everything, does that fall back on them as well?
Well, it doesn't, as far as I can tell, because they were held 0% liable. And so they are not going to be financially responsible alone. And, you know, again, their son, who is in custody, who was 17 at the time, who likely has no assets, I don't know that they're going to be held responsible for him. And so when it comes down to actually getting paid out on any of these big numbers we heard today, I don't think that's realistic. But what I do think is that it was a huge message to send regarding the importance of these lives, both the individuals who were injured, the individuals who died that day tragically. And of course, it gave an opportunity, I think, for the parents and loved ones and the community to really hear more about the shooter, about his family, and about what they went through and what led up to this shooting. Outside of a trial like this, we had nothing but questions and very few answers. And so, as hard as it was to go through this multi-week trial, we've gotten a lot more information than we ever had and may ever get as regards this shooting and the shooter himself.
What implications could this proceeding have on future proceedings for Dimitris Pagorchis?
Well, I think a lot of information's come out that would likely be used and helpful in the course of the criminal trial if and when we get there. As I said, at this time, he's been declared incompetent by a judge. He cannot stand trial until he becomes competent. It's not uncommon for him or any other individual to spend time in a mental facility where he is now. He gains competency and then they move forward with the trial. And I think if this goes to a criminal trial in the near future, I think a lot of the information that came out today will be developed even further and give us even more information about what went on in the home and leading up to the shooting that day.
So I'm just curious, it's been 6 years. Pagorchis has been deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial all this time. How likely is that to even change?
Well, as I said, Len, we've had some pretty significant incompetency type issues surrounding capital murder cases here in Harris County. And eventually we get to a place where almost all of them come to a place where we can go to trial with those cases. I mean, it's troubling and it's a difficult issue. Mental health issues at the intersection of criminal justice issues are always extremely complicated. But I think the medical facility is working hard to get him to a place of competency so that he can be held responsible in a criminal proceeding, and so that these families can have their day in court and get justice out of this system surrounding this horrible shooting.
Carmen, I have to ask, you are an expert in law. Were there any surprises with this verdict in the civil trial and with these series of questions that had to be answered?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm really surprised that the jury rejected any liability for the parents at all, because that's what this trial was really about. It wasn't a criminal proceeding. It's a civil proceeding that was meant to hold these parents responsible, liable under a negligence theory for the ultimate outcome, in this case involving the shooting at the hands of their son. And that was wholly rejected by this jury. Peers in that community said, no, we're not going to hold the parents responsible. We're going to hold the ammunition company responsible, but only at 20%. We're going to make 80% of this case about the shooter and his intentional acts, with malice. And we're going to assign some pretty big numbers to that to set the tone for how awful we think this is and how much he's responsible. I think a lot of people who watch criminal cases as well as civil litigation surrounding parents and their liability with guns inside the home is something that is changing. But the change that we're seeing across the country, and most recently in a criminal action where the parents were put in prison for allowing their child to have access to weapons when others died as a result. Here in Galveston County, that was wholly rejected today. And I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by that decision in our community.
Do you think it's the evidence or the testimony or a combination of both that perhaps led the jury to make that decision?
You know, I don't know that I could say because I didn't sit in the courtroom and watch all the testimony, but my guess would be from what I saw and certainly what I read in this jury charge, I think this jury struggled with saying that even if negligent, the parents' conduct was the proximate cause, the but-for cause of this shooting, and that his intentional acts separated them completely.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's clear that their son has some mental issues. He's been deemed mentally incompetent, and yet the jury decided they weren't responsible for managing that in a way to prevent him from allegedly carrying out this shooting.
That's right, Len. And the question is, did the jury believe that the parents really had no way of knowing and did not know how significant his mental health issues were? I mean, he was diagnosed with 7 different mental disease or defects soon after this shooting. And so, again, we'll never know why they rejected the negligence claim because it had 2 portions to it. But they heard a lot of evidence about what the parents should have known. But of course, the parents testified that they had no way of knowing and they didn't know.
Our KHU 11 legal analyst, Carmen Rowe, thank you for your insight. I know it's a lot of details. Again, the parents of the alleged gunman in the Santa Fe High School shooting in 2018 not found liable in any way in relation to their son's actions on that day.
It's a big story, a lot to wrap up here. We'll have much more for you tonight on KHOU 11 News at 10. That's this evening after the Democratic National Convention happening this evening. Right here on KHOU 11 News, you can watch it all. We'll see you a little bit later tonight.